Richard, as someone who's been wearing a CGM, obviously it's essential for me, but I've been wearing it nonstop since 2017. So coming up 7 years now. So, another myth is like whole grains or complex carbohydrates are perfectly fine. My CGM doesn't agree with that. My CGM cannot even tell the difference between whole wheat bread, seeded, well, add the seeds to it too, seeded bread, and white bread. It just doesn't recognize the difference. So when you try to explain these things to people, they've got that information ingrained in them. Another one is actually, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 5 years old, and we're going back 1970s. All these fancy glucose drinks and glucose tablets and whatever, they didn't exist. So whenever I would have low blood sugars, guess what my mom would bring me? White bread sandwich. She'd bring me a sandwich, and within 10 minutes, that bread, of course, is turned into glucose. And that saved me from a dangerous hypoglycemic episode. People don't understand that unless you've experienced it, right? It's sugar. I mean, you might as well be eating sugar.
Exactly. And this, I think, for anyone listening who is new to this way of thinking and this new way of eating, carbohydrates break down into sugar. And it one of the hardest things to recognize is on a label where it says carbohydrate, say 80 grams, and then it'll say of which sugar's 5. It's a fallacy because that 5 grams is of which sugars immediately, but the rest all sugar soon after. We may store some of that as glycogen, but it will sugar eventually. All carbs in regards to dietary carbohydrate is sugar. And when we look at a bowl of muesli, for example, if that were contain around 100 grams of carbohydrate, that's the equivalent to around 20 teaspoons of sugar. And the amount of sugar that we need, or glucose that the body needs at any one time in circulation, is around a teaspoon. So it's that's considerably higher than the volume that we need. And this is where insulin resistance in regards to a type 2 diabetic comes from, because the pancreas goes into overdrive in order to upregulate this production of insulin, to drive that glucose down, basically to pull it out of the blood to save your life, because excess glucose in the blood is a toxin to the body. Yes, we need some, but we can make all of the glucose that we need through a process called gluconeogenesis. The body will convert lactate and lipid and protein, and it will make glucose through gluconeogenesis, which is pretty similar to how we make how glycolysis works. But it's almost in reverse, bar 3 different steps. But we make this naturally within the body, and we can make a lot of it as well. And interestingly, I realized this when I had a continuous blood glucose monitor. I was running a 10K race in Kempton. I think it was last year, or maybe the year prior. And I took my blood glucose reading, which was incredibly low because I don't consume any carbohydrate. It was 3 point something, which would be of concern to most people, but my body creates ketones, so my body isn't fueled that way, so my body works differently. There was another gentleman there who was a type 2 diabetic. I'm obviously no longer type 2. His blood glucose, I think, was like 6 or maybe 7. And we ran the race. At the end of the race, now bearing in mind, I don't consume carbohydrate. These other runners are taking in lots of carb, ready to fuel, ready for their race. At the end of the race, my blood glucose on the CGM was 10.6. Where's that glucose come from? My body has made that glucose. My body made all of the glucose that it needed within that moment. And more interestingly, that type 2 diabetic who was cramming in all of this these carbohydrate drinks and foods to fuel his run, his carbohydrate was lower. So it had the opposite effect with him, which I found really interesting. But I mean, it was proof positive to me that the body will make all of the glucose that it needs on demand. We just need to give it the correct ingredients in order to do that, But So much misinformation.